So our starting point is going to be Mistika VR. In here we have several shots that are already stitched. I'm going to move through them so you can see them. We have the Insta360 Pro camera over here. You see that optical flow has been enabled. We have the stitch done across the whole sequence. Colors match. So this shot is already finished from the stitching part. Then we have the Nokia also. If we enabled the overlays, we can see that we have some edge points over here. So we have some specific functionalities applied for this shot. Then we have a rig from GoPro with 6 GoPro cameras. In this one, we have applied as well the optical flow. We have matched all the color as well. And we have the synchronization information over here, because in this case, the 6 cameras from GoPro were not synchronized. So we used the audio sync to have them, all of them at the same moment in time. Then finally, we have a 4th shot, which is from a sugar that I have in here, just to offer another camera, another option. As well, we have applied the optical flow, we have the feather between cameras, and we even have an stitch, an edge point that is animated. So basically we have like several options here for any of those shots. So what I'm going to do in here is just save the project to move to Mistika Boutique. In other situations where you want to make the finishing, for example in other software, so you want to make the editing in other software, you have to render this in Mistika VR and then use the render files to continue the job. In this case, because Mistika VR and Mistika Boutique are perfectly well integrated because they use the same core, they use the Mistika technology, I can just save the project from here and open the project in Mistika Boutique. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to save this sequence as. And in here, I'm going to call it to Boutique. I have here the name, so I'm going to call it to Boutique, save as. And there you go, that's it. This is all I'm going to do in Mistika VR in this masterclass. As you can see, the resolution here is pretty low. It's HD and 30 frames per second. The reason why I choose this resolution is, of course, because, well, first, I'm doing this masterclass from a laptop, so I don't have a full workstation to work with these shots in a proper way at a very high resolution. And secondly, because, well, resolution in Mistika is dynamic, so that doesn't matter too much. I can just work at HD here, then move to Mistika Boutique and change the resolution as I want, and everything will be adapted to that new resolution. So if we go now to Mistika Boutique, I'm going to remove these 2 clips that I had in here. So now we have an empty timeline. As you can see in the timeline name, I don't have any names because, again, this timeline is empty. It's not even saved in my project. I'm using the Masterclass VR project that I created before, and I'm using a 2K resolution and 30 frames per second. Again, as I said, resolution and even frame rate in Mistika is dynamic, so I can change it at any moment. To select the right settings for my project, I need to use the mconfig utility that I have in here. Okay, we have several factory presets, presets for resolution for VR projects in here. I'm using the 2K one, but as you can see, you have 4K, 6K, 8K, etc. And of course, you can create your own preset for your project and select the resolution that you want. Which is important when you select your settings for a VR project, is go to master formats and be sure that the aspect ratio is 2.0, because this is the right aspect ratio for VR project. So as long as we select the right aspect ratio, everything will be fine. Even if we work, for example, in 2K for the finishing, then later we can just change this resolution to 4K, 6K, 8K, or whatever, and make the final render. So we can work at different resolution to the final delivery just to work faster. And that's the reason why I just choose in this case 2K resolution. Okay. So I'm going to close mconfig for now because I don't need it for this masterclass. If you want to see more details or a more dedicated explanation for this part of the software, in the first masterclass we explained a little bit the functionalities in the main tabs in the mconfig. So for now I'm going just to press OK. and I'm going to come back to my timeline in Mistika. So as we have done, it's just we just saved the project from Mistika VR, and we are just open the same project in Mistika Boutique. So I'm going to go to my media folder. There we go. And I saved in here some bookmarks just to go faster to the right folders. The first one is my project from Mistika VR, so I'm going to make double click, go to data, and in here I have two options. Stitch environment, which is basically the environment that I have at the beginning in Mistika VR, and the one that we saved for Mistika Boutique. So I'm going just to make double click to load it. And there we go. Now if we decrease a little bit the size of my zoom level in my timeline here, over here, we have all my shots from Mistika VR in here. As you can see, the aspect of the timeline here looks quite different compared with Mistika VR, because in Mistika VR we only have a storyboard with the thumbnails of all my shots, and in Mistika Boutique we have a full timeline to control my shots, make the editing, make the finishing, color grading, compositing, etc. So at the end, it's much more flexible to manage a VR project from Mistika Boutique than doing it in Mistika VR. Mistika VR is only for stitching, so I always recommend that if you're working in the Mistika VR and you have the option to have Mistika Boutique, move as soon as you can to Mistika Boutique to control your VR project. Okay. So let's focus now here in how the shots look and how to make a quick edit adjustment between all these shots. The first thing I want to focus is in this area over here. This shot, as you can see, have like different colors in the video clips. This is basically the shot that we synchronized by audio in Mistika VR, and this difference that we see here, this different color that we see here, is basically the offset between the clips in frames. In Mistika VR, we can control that offset with these values over here, which has the numbers. This is the number of frames that has been used to match all the cameras together. In this case, we have the same number of frames in here, but the visualization again is different. If we want to change, for example, if we want to move one of this clip one frame before or one frame after, or several frames before or several frames after, we can just go to here to the calculator. Here I have 100 frames selected. I'm going to select 20 frames, even if it's a high value, just to show in a clear way how this works. So I can just select my clip and press shift. And in this way, I just shift in my clip, but without affecting my stitch or the rest of my timeline. It's just shifting internally in the clip. So if we need to move one of these clips by one frame or two frames, we can just select one in here and just shift in one direction or the other direction. In this particular case, I'm not going to make any adjustments. I'm going to trust of the idea of Mistika has aligned the clips correctly. By the way, if you need to align them in Mistika Boutique directly, you have that option over here. You have the align clips in here. So it's the same option. You just need to take all my clips, go to align clips by audio, and you have the same parameters that you had in Mistika VR. At the end, Mistika Boutique and Mistika VR are the same thing, but in Mistika Boutique, you have much more options for finish your job. That's it. But the core and the technology is the same. So that's the reason why the tools looks exactly the same and they do exactly the same. So in this particular case, what I'm going to do first is just, well, I did here some adjustments at the beginning as well. So I'm going just to cut the areas that I don't have interest. So I'm going to move internally with the right button of the mouse and just put in here. And with the middle button, I'm just going to make a gesture for top to bottom to subdivide the clip in two. This part is not very interesting for us because it has all the synchronizing information, and those areas over here that looks darker basically is a frozen frame with the duration of the shot. So what I'm going to do is just take this part and remove it. And I'm going to make the same thing with the head of my shot, because if we go to here, to the beginning of my shot, we will see that there are some parts that are not very well synchronized together here. This is because in here the guy is placing the camera on the rig, so that part is not really interesting for us as well. So I'm going just to clean it by going here and just cut as well the head. Of course, I'm doing this in a very rough way without checking the right frame to do it, but at the end the functionality is the same thing. So I can just enable here this level, this zoom level, to see the thumbnails and select the right moment in timeline. So here I can see at least the moment that I want to use for cut this shot. I have it disabled it because at the end, if I have a lot of shots, I will load the thumbnails of every of those shots, which means an important decrease in performance on the timeline, because if you have many of them, you need to keep in mind that you are basically stitching all those clips, applying optical flow. You have to load many clips per shot or per cut. So at the end, it's a lot of media in the timeline loading the thumbnails at every moment. So that's the reason why I normally choose a lower zoom level to manage VR media, at least in this level where I have everything here developed. So I'm going to remove this part as well. And now I'm going to remove those empty areas between shots. I can just take one of those stacks and just drag to place it here. Or I can just take these two, use the back option, and it will do the same thing. Or as a third option, I can just take both of them, and with a gesture, just from bottom to top, and then bottom again, like a triangle, I can just collapse those both shots. I can do the same thing from here by just selecting here, top, and there you go. Yeah. So now we have just removed those empty space between shots. Now, when I have a full VR project here and I need to make editing, it's a bit complicated to try to work all the time in stacks. It's much more simple to just take one clip and make all the edits over there and affect the rest of the shots that are below it. So what I'm going to do is to take all my clips in here, go to macro, and I'm going to select group segments. And in this way, I'm just grouping all my stacks in independent segments, which makes things much easier, because right now I can just move internally, I can cut as we did at the beginning, we can just move this to the end. I can trim, for example, this shot. For trimming, I move internally with the right button of the mouse to the head or the tail. And without releasing the right button, click left and drag. So I can just make a trimming in this way. Oops, I just moved to the next shot. And there we go. Okay, so I can organize my timeline as I want to make my edit. In case that we need to, for example, apply a transition between two shots, I can just move this below, select these two clips, and then apply fade up. And this way we're just creating some dissolve between the two shots. So those are basic operations for editing stuff in Mistika's timeline, in this case VR media. We can use as well for the trimming the calculator if we need more accurate parameters or more accurate adjustments. We can just select in here, let's say 50 frames. All right, and I can just select the way that this will trim. So for example, in here in tail, this will only affect the selected clip, and as you can see, now it's creating an overlap over the other clip, because of course we are just trimming this clip over the other one. But if we select, there we go. If we put in local, if I now move this, I will move the other one without affecting the rest of my timeline, just the closest one. And if I select global, I will move the whole timeline. So with these three options, you can select the way that the trimming will work. In fact, this works as well with the gesture. All right, so even in an interactive way, we can make the same adjustment. The good thing of working with groups, because groups are a very powerful feature in Mistika. If we go to one of those shots, for example, this one, the smaller one, and we go inside the group with the navigation button here, what we have is our VR stitch with all the cameras. If we open one of these VR stitch effect, we have all the parameters that we had from Mistika VR. We don't need to go back to Mistika VR to make any change. We can just make the stitching here or change any parameter of our stitching here. We have the edge points as well, as you can see, so we can move them. We can make any adjustment that we want. Everything is in here, so we don't need to go back to Mistika VR. One common question in Mistika VR is how to make different versions of the same stitch. Currently in Mistika VR, there is not a quick option for that. In Mistika Boutique, it's much more simple, and in fact, we have like several ways to do it. I'm going to explain the one that I normally prefer. I can just go back to my timeline, go one level up to my group, and I can just group this again, this shot again. All right. So now I have just create a group of a group. If I now go inside, I have the group of that clip, and inside, of course, I have all my shots with the VR stitch on top of it. Well, with Alt, I can just drag and create another version. These two versions are independent between them. So from here, I can just make any adjustment. I'm going to make a big adjustment so we can see the difference between the two shots. Yeah, with the Evolve tree in here, I have this kind of triangle here that if I press it, I can just see the content of the group. So I go to VR stitch effect, go to the output camera, and I'm going to change the temperature just to make a difference. There you go. Just to make a difference between the two shots. Now let's say that you want to compare the result of the two stitches between them. Well, we have several ways to do it. One, and probably the most common one, is to select both of them. Go to wipe, and in here insert a wipe effect. The wipe effect has an animation by default. As you can see, the grade has an animation. You see this blue line over the timeline. This means that automatically is creating an animation, a transition between the two shots. As you can see, the wipe effect has two inputs, one input and the second input, the two shots that we are comparing between them. Well, the fast way to do it is just select the grade, press delete, and in that way we are just removing the animation and leave it at the 50% of my shot. If I need to move to one side or the other, I can just move it and compare the result of my stitch. Okay. Another way to do it is using the stereo 3D functionalities. Even if this effect has not been designed with the idea of comparing shots, it's very powerful because I can just enter the stereo 3D, and stereo 3D will understand that this is left eye and right eye. The good thing is I can just enable the stereo mode, and I can compare the difference between them. I can just enable the left eye, I can just go to the right eye, I can just compare side by side so we can see both of them, top and bottom, make a difference between them to see where is a difference between the two shots, make a mix. You have several options to check the result, to apply a checkerboard, for example, here to check the result and compare one stitch with the other. So again, in Mistika there are always several ways to do the same thing. This is a quick example of that. You have the wipe, you have the stereo 3D, and of course there are much more views, much more ways to do this. In fact, in the forums we have a full topic explaining how to compare two clips, but those are good options. All right, so I'm going to remove the stereo 3D and go up. Okay. So now let's say that we have made our editing. We just moved some clips, we have made some trimmings, we have applied some transitions, we have compared some stitch as well. Let's start with the finishing part of the VR shots. I'm going to use for that example this shot over here, the one with the GoPro cameras. I select this shot because I have pretty obvious here. I'm going to enable the VR mode. Pretty obvious a tripod with a shadow over here, which is the first thing I want to remove. There you go. So before starting with any color grading, any compositing, or any export, of course, I'm going just to remove the shadow and the tripod of my shot. So to do that, I'm going to open my node graph. I normally open and use the node graph when I need to make complex compositing. In this case, it's not complex, but I'm going to duplicate links and to create the paths and clean the tripod. So to do that is much easy to understand how to do it with the node graph. So the first thing I'm going to select here is the VR view effect. The VR view effect is an effect that it is only in Mistika. You cannot find this option in Mistika VR, even if it's related with VR. Here in Mistika, we have basically like two effects dedicated for VR, VR View and VR Stitch. But don't worry, because the rest of your library of effects has been adapted to work as well in VR. So color grading will work as well in VR. The blur and the sharpen will work as well as in VR, as we will see later. So all the effects work in the same way that you normally work in a non-VR project. Those effects will work in a VR project. But in this case, we have the stitch, the VR stitch, which is the basic effect for the stitching, and then the VR view. And in this case, we are going to use the VR view. The VR view effect is an effect that allows us to switch between the different modes of seeing VR. We have the lat long mode, the cube, tiny planet, planar mode, equidistant and equisolid fisheye, cube equiangular there. So we have several options. In this case, we are going to use the planar mode. And with the planar mode enabled, I'm just going to rotate my camera, the pitch. We have here the yaw pitch roll to control my camera. I'm going to select the tripod and the shadow. So I'm going to select first my tripod, then rotate the camera, because of course I have more space in the horizontal than I have in the vertical. So for that reason, I'm going to rotate my camera to select more area of my tripod. And then I'm going to decrease the focal length to have all the shadow in my shot, in my clip. So we're going to clean this patch over here. This is now like even if we are working as in 360 in a 360 environment, for Mistika this is like a normal 2D image with some distortion applied, which is basically the distortion of the camera that we have applied in here. So I'm going to move this here and apply a vector paint to clean the area of the tripod. With the vector paint, I double click it to go to my visual editor here, and the paint has a proper interface that we go in with the paint button over here. There we go. And in here we have a full tool set for painting. In this case, I'm just going to select the clone for, but first I'm going to increase the size of my brush. There we go. And select the clone for, make zoom in. And with Alt, I'm going to select a reference area and then paint over the part that I want to fix. I'm going to do it this a bit quicker, but of course with time you can get better results. Okay, and I'm going to clean here the shadow over here, and then here in a much rough way, just clean the rest of my tripod and the shadow. There you go. Okay, so once we have it, we have now like a clean patch that we need to integrate with the rest of our VR shot. In Mistika, the paint only works in one frame by default. So if you want to make it work in the whole duration of your shot, you need to click in all shapes to select automatically all shapes, and then click in all frames. So in this way, this paint will work across the whole duration of the shot. Now we can just go back, and here we have the patch. But this is not 360 or anything. It's just like a normal 2D patch that we need to integrate with my lat long image. So to do that, I'm going to just come back, and I'm going to duplicate this link. This operation can only be done here in the node graph, not in the timeline, and that's the reason why I'm using the node graph here. When you duplicate some link in the node graph, a link effect will appear here in the timeline. Timeline and node graph are completely synchronized, so every time that you make a change in here, it will appear in change in here and vice versa. But in this case, I'm going to work with the node graph by duplicating the link, and I'm going to insert another VR view effect. And this VR view effect is the compositor, because the VR view effect is a compositor as well. Every time that you put something as a secondary input, it will be composed in the 360 environment. In this case, we're going to compose the vector paint with my original image, which is my background. So I'm going just to connect it as the secondary input. And now, as you remember, there is some adjustment that we did in the previous VR view, just to rotate the camera and isolate the tripod. What we need to do is just to reverse these operations to get, again, the normal lat-long image. So to do that, we go to the second VR view. As you can see, we have one input, which is my background, and another input, which is my vector paint. This link is pointing 1, 2, 3, as the number said, to the background. So in here, I'm just going to select reverse of previous VR view camera. You don't have to make the reverse by yourself, put in here the reverse value. You just click in here. And automatically, if we refresh the image, this was our original shot. This is how it looks now. We have just removed the tripod and the shadow. The good thing of this is that we are still using the raw media of my camera. I have all the stitching here and all my raw clips in here. If I make any change in the VR stitch, this is a non-destructive workflow. So the vector paint will take all the adjustments and it will generate the patch again for the VR view, for the last VR view. Of course, depending on the complexity of your project, of the complexity of your shot, if you are using a strong optical flow or you are applying a lot of effects, at some point maybe you will need a render, because at the end we are working here. Even if we're working in 2K, we're working with 6 clips at the same time, applying optical flow to all of them, and then making a compositing to remove that tripod. And everything is calculated on the fly. So, well, yeah, it can be. It's possible that you can you may have a situation where you need to make a render to work faster. For now, we are going to stay with the raw media, and we are going to continue working with this shot. The next step will be the color grading, because as you can see, this looks a bit flat. All right. So for grading, I can just group this again if I want to clean a little bit my timeline. So let's do it. I'm going just to group this. So now it looks cleaner. If I need to modify something, I can just go inside my group. Or again, if we go to the visual editor, clicking in this triangle here, I have all my effects and everything here to select the one that we want to modify. Okay, so I'm going to select the color grade effect. And the good thing of the color grade in Mistika is that this is a quite different aspect of Mistika compared with other solutions in the market, finishing solutions, not only for VR, but for non-VR project, is that the color grading is one effect in the full library. So color grade is fully integrated with any of those effects. It can be used for compositing, it can be used for grading, it can be used for anything really. I use normally color grade, for example, to create keys and to create chromas, even if I have here the green screen and the blue screen, because it allows me to have, it gives me a lot of features and functionality for those kind of operations. In this case, we're going to use it for grading, but just to let you know that this can be combined with any of the effects that we have in this library over here. Okay, so double click to go to our color grade node. And in my color grade, we have a full color grading toolset. Okay, this is Mistika at the end is a finishing system, it's a color grading system. So you have any possible tool that you can imagine for grading in here. We're not going to explain all the tools in this masterclass, because in fact, the next masterclass will be focused on color grading. And even if we are going to use in that masterclass non-VR projects, the features and the tools are the same for VR or non-VR projects. So I strongly recommend to take a look to that new masterclass to understand a little bit better how it works, how the color grade works in Mistika. In this case, we're going to use the tool in a pretty basic way, but at least you will have an overview of how this works. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create some contrast in my image. I'm going to open my scope in here. There we go. And I'm going to make some contrast. Okay, so I'm going to decrease a little bit the gamma, white point. All right. Okay, let's say that this is quite enough. And I'm going just to increase the saturation to have a little bit of color in my shot. Okay, so we can see the difference over here. As you can see in the adjustment of the contrast, we have some values over the limit here. We can just change the scale by clicking in the grid from 10 to 1000, or you can work in nits or in float points, wherever you want, or here in 8 bits. Okay, so I'm going to work at 10 bits, and as you can see, there are values that goes above the limit. So I want to recover those values without affecting the rest of my shot, because I think that the contrast is good enough to work with. So what I'm going to do is just use the pivot here in my soft clip. Okay, the pivot basically works in percentage. So right now I have the pivot of this trackball at 50% of my shot, so it will be close for in here basically, right? So I'm going to increase that value and I'm going to select 80%. I normally doesn't select 100%. Even if I want to control the values that are over that value, I normally don't select 100% because at the end this has a roll-off here, and I want to apply the adjustment with some softness. So I select 80, and with the soft clip, as you can see, we can just recover those values without affecting the rest of the shot. See how it changed in the scope? And I'm not changing the rest of the curve, just only the highlights. So Mistika gives us here a very an incredible flexibility to control the luminance and the contrast of our shot. Okay, there we go. I'm going just to decrease a little bit the white point as well, something like this. All right. Okay, the shot looks now a bit, the contrast I think is fairly good, but the shot looks a bit yellowish. So I'm going to create another layer, and I go to my bands, which basically are like my secondary color correction. From here I can just control the luminance in a very elegant way, the luminance of my shot, because there is a difference between primary and bands. Primary works in RGB, so every time that I control even the luminance here, I'm affecting the saturation of my shot and the chrominance of my shot. In bands, when I control this, I control the luminance in an independent way, because this works in hue, saturation, and luma. So it has a different math compared with primary. So from here, I can just increase a little bit the shadow. I don't need those shadows here. And of course, what I'm going to do is just to control the hue of my shot to move it to something more magenta, something like that. Okay, so the next step would be for me like change the color of the sky, because it looks a bit boring for me. I'm going to increase the saturation to make it more exciting. So I'm going to fix vector, and the fix vector is a tool that all the colorists in Mistika loves, because it's really clean, and it allows you to control the color in a very quick way. This is control the hue, this controls the saturation, and this controls the luminance of primary and secondary colors. In this case, I'm going to take the blues in here and just go to move to this blue over here, something like that. I'm going just to increase the saturation to something like that, and maybe decrease a little bit the luminance to there. So if we mute, we can see the difference between one or the other. As you can see, we are controlling the sky very well without affecting the rest of the shots. Again, this tool is really clean to make adjustment in one specific color without making a key of this of the sky or anything else. Okay, so now I have like my general look of the shot is done, but now we go to the details. These trees over here in the background looks a bit yellowish for me. So I'm going to change them to something more greenish. For that, I'm going to disable the scope because I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to create another layer. And in this layer, what I'm going to do is to select those trees over here. To select them, I'm going to use the keyer. Okay, so we go to keyer. And in here, we have three keys. We have the HSL key, which is the hue, saturation, and luma key, the RGB, and the 3D key. We're not going to explain the three of them. We're going just to focus on the hue, saturation, and luma key, but the three of them can be combined to create pre-advanced selections. In this case, I'm going just to focus on those trees over here. So I'm going to enable my highlight to see my selection. And with the middle button, I'm going just to rotate until I select the area that I want. With the middle, I can just change the range of my selection. And with the left button, I can just rotate to select the color that I want to isolate. So here we have the trees. With the right button, I can just create some softness in the sides of my selection. Okay. From here, for example, we see that we have some contaminated pixels here in the rocks. I can just try to remove them by lowering the luminance. There you go. So now I'm just removing those elements and just isolating the plants and the forest in the background. To make my selection a bit more soft, I go to here to the key blur, and I'm going just to increase the value to blur my selection. Okay, we have another option here, which is the proportional mode. And the proportional mode basically takes the native saturation level of the pixel and selects and make the selection follow that saturation. So if I enable the proportional, you will see that we have like more gray hues in my selection, because it's taking as well the shadows and the details here in the background. So it's basically selecting the pixels with the right saturation, following the saturation of the original clip, of the original shot. In this case, it's not really important to use it or not, because at the end it doesn't change too much and it's in the background, so we don't need it. But it's an interesting tool if you have to make a selection of a skin and you want to keep all the details in the shadows of that skin, etc. So for now, I'm going to leave it disabled, but just to let you know that you have this option over here. Once I have my selection done, I'm going to go to my fixed vectors again, because this is a quick way to change it. And from here, I'm going just to select from yellow to green. I can just change a little bit the saturation and the luminance if I want. So now if we compare the result, we have this looks at the beginning, and now the shot looks a bit more interesting thanks to that green hue over there. Of course, we can control the saturation to make it more nature, more organic or not. So again, I'm going to enable and disable it to see the result. All right, so from here now we can just go to the color grade, and we have an A icon here that we can press to bypass the color grade and compare the result of how it looks at the beginning and how it looks now with the color grading node applied. Okay. All right, so now let's say that our shot has been graded, and now we want to integrate some objects here, some compositing, some titles, I don't know, any kind of object can be integrated in 360 environment with Mistika Boutique. In this particular case, we are going to use a title. So instead of creating a title here internally, what I'm going to do is to load an external title. I have here in my VR media some animation done. This is a TIFF sequence. So I'm going to load my sequence, link as progressive sequence, and there you go. Now if we go to here, we have an animation we have with several words moving, etc. The first thing we need to keep in mind is that the resolution of this clip is different from the resolution of the project. This is not a big deal. This is just a small warning because again, Mistika, the resolution of Mistika projects are dynamic, so we can change it at any moment. But to adapt this clip to the resolution of my project, I need to insert first a framing node. So I'm going to load the framing node, and in my framing node, I'm going to select in the result size parameter, I'm going to select project. So in this way, the resolution of this clip will change with the resolution of the project. The good thing of this clip is that if we took a look in here, the aspect ratio between the project and the clip is the same. So I don't need to do anything else. If the aspect ratio is different, we should go to the fit option and select the way that we want to fit, the way that we want to fit the clip in my project. Okay, so now we go back. And now to integrate the object in Mistika, we have one option really. But if you know a little bit of Mistika, probably the first option for you is just use a Com3D, which is the main compositor in Mistika. But this doesn't work, because if I use the Com3D, I'm going to put it as an example, double clicking to go inside the Com3D, there we go. I'm going to create another layer because we have basically my background, which is my original clip with the color grade on top of it, and my title here. So I'm going to create another layer to control both elements independently. And now if I move this title up, you see that the title is not at all integrated in VR. It's not following the key rectangular distortion. And the reason why it is not doing that is because Com3D work in position X, Y, and Z. And a VR shot doesn't have this kind of coordinates. It has yaw, pitch, roll. So we need to use those parameters in order to integrate something with my background. So what I'm going to do, instead of using the Com3D, and I'm going just to remove it, is going to use the VR view, because remember that the VR view effect is a compositor as well for VR. So I'm going to import here the VR view and just extend the scope of the effect to take my background and my foreground, which is the title. So I'm going to make double click in here. And as you can see now, the title has changed a little bit, but the adjustment is not correct. The reason why is because now the VR view is expecting that the title is in lat long, and in reality is in planar mode. So we have to click in here in reverse. Now the title is integrated, but it looks very tiny. So what I'm going to do is to go to the framing node and just scale the title up. There you go. Okay, so from here I can just move the title up with yaw pitch roll. I can move it, for example, with pitch, and now we can see that the title is adapting to the rectangular coordinates of my VR shot. Of course, if we put it in here, for example, we can enable now the VR mode, and if we take a look up, we see that the title now is fully integrated. Okay. This works, of course, as well in a stereo 3D. So, for example, I have here a shot with a stereo 3D, which is the Insta360 Pro camera. So I'm going to open this shot. I'm going to, I have here the stereo mode, the checkerboard enabled, but I'm going to open the black and white anaglyph. So you can see that, in fact, yes, this is a 3D shot. Now, how can we integrate an object or composite something in 3D with Mistika Boutique? We do the same thing, but I'm going to move this here and use the same VR view. This will integrate the title with the background, but of course the title doesn't have any kind of stereoscopic parameter, because this is a monoscopic clip. So the way to transform this monoscopic clip in a stereo 3D clip is by going to Effects, clicking in Stereo 3D, and now with the stereo 3D selected, I can just control, in the balance geometry, I can control the position X to change the depth of the title. So now we are changing and moving this title in the 3D space as well. So again, even if we are working with a monoscopic objects, we can just transform them to a stereo 3D. Let's see now with another shot, two more important features. I'm going to load here an EXR multi-layer shot. I'm not going to explain too much about the VR, the multi-layer EXR shots, but in this case, if we make double click of this, we see that we don't have any kind of image. This is a black solid. The reason why we have that is because this shot has multiple layers of information. So the way to extract the RGB layer is loading a layer root effect. This is not related with VR. It will work with any multi-layer EXR file, but in this case I need to use it for this example. So I'm going to go to the layer set, and here I'm going to select interior RGB. So, well, first I need to disable the stereo 3D mode, and now we load the RGB layer for this clip. This is in linear light, so even if it's this is in linear, it's a VR shot, but we can apply any kind of effect in here to transform the gamma curve. So I'm going to load the unicolor, which is our color management tool for any kind of shots. This tool will be explained in detail in the next masterclass. In here, I'm just going to make a quick adjustment. I'm going just to move from linear gamma curve to gamma 2.4 to see the image in a good way. Okay, so the tool that I want to show you is in the color grade. We have shapes for VR shots. If I enable here the window, I enable the shape, and I select the planar mode and create a shape, you will see that the shape, it works like a normal shape. You see, it's not following it. It happens like it happened with the Com3D and the title. It doesn't follow the coordinates of the rectangular shot. But if I enable the lat long shape, with only 4 points, for example, in this case, I can just isolate this area of the window. And as you can see, the shape is following the distortion of the rectangular shot. I can just take these two points, increase the softness. I'm going to make the same thing here, increase the softness over there. And what I'm going to do is to create some kind of effect of light coming through the window. So I go to primary, change the gamma. And if I create a new layer just to hide the overlays of the shape, we see that we have created that effect in here. In fact, if we enable the VR mode, we will see that the result is working in VR perfectly well. So shapes are adapted as well to work in VR. Now, as a final example for the finishing area, let's say that we want to apply some kind of filters to improve the aspect of the shot. So for example, if we apply a blur, just to explain how this works, if we apply a blur and increase the value and then enable the VR mode, this won't work well, because if we go to the edge, we see an edge line over here because Mistika is not understanding that this is a VR shot. But if we select in the mapping parameter here the lat long mode, now Mistika is understanding that this is a VR shot, and now it works perfectly well. Well, the blur doesn't make any sense in this example, but the sharpen can help to have a better look. So I'm going to the sharpen, select lat long, and just increase the radius. So now I'm just adding a little bit of detail over my shot. And of course, this sharpen will work in the 360 space. Now, once we have finished with our finishing process, is the moment to render this. And rendering Mistika is pretty similar of rendering in Mistika VR. We have the same options, the same formats here, but we have more options to control the render. So in this case, because we have an infinite timeline, we need first to isolate the area that we want to render with the edit marks. There you go. And now we're selecting here the format. We have more formats here than in Mistika VR, but the most important ones are in both softwares. And here, we need to select, for example, that we have this shot, and we need to select that this timeline is stereoscopic. We need to go to the gear over here, click in stereo mode, and select the mode that we are going to use for the render. In this case, top and bottom, which is the normal way to export stereoscopic VR content. And so once we have it, now we can just select, for example, ProRes, in case that we need to export this in good quality, ProRes, and just go to the foreground and start the rendering. You can export all the timeline as a single clip, or you can export the shots in an individual way by timecode. So you will export in individual clips all the shots of your timeline. But other than that, the parameters are the same. Here you can control just the timecode if you want to use the clip timecode or the timeline timecode, etc. But those parameters are important for the next masterclass, where we will see how to conform from an external software and how to reconform, and those values are useful to create the proxies in Mistika Boutique to move to the editor that we prefer, the external editor that we prefer. Okay, so with this final example, it finished this masterclass. Now it's the moment of questions. The questions can be related with VR or with anything else. We will try to answer all of them in the time that we have. And yeah, so let's start with them. Okay, so I have one from Shanti. Is asking that, would it be a good workflow to just work in HD resolution, then output 2K or 8K or 2K later? Would it help functionality? It's a good workflow, yes. In fact, you don't need to work in 8K, for example, because at the end it's important. It's impossible to manage 8K media without a huge system. So I always recommend to work at lower resolution when finishing. You normally don't need to see all the details at 6K, 8K, or huge resolutions. If you're making the grading, 2K should be enough. If you're making compositing, maybe 4K for some extreme situations, but other than that, you can work at lower resolution and then just change your resolution for the final delivery. Can you do the whole thing in Mistika Boutique? Yes, of course. You can make the stitch in Mistika Boutique. As we said at the beginning, this will be explained in the next masterclass of VR. The next one is for color grading, but then we will have another one for VR. And in that masterclass, we will explain how to make the stitch directly in Mistika Boutique. The VR stitch basically has the same parameters and all the options that you have in Mistika VR, but with another interface is the only difference. How is Stereo 3D 360 video delivered for VR in terms of resolutions, format, etc.? Well, as we explained, is basically what we said at the end. So we can just take, for example, this shot, which is stereoscopic, go to the output, and then selecting here the mode of the stereoscopic output. In this case, top and bottom should be the by default option for VR shots. And in terms of resolution, it depends on the resolution that you want for your delivery. Right now we have 2K, which is not enough for a VR project. But if I have to work in a real project, I probably will work in 2K or 3K for the finishing, then save my timeline, go to my unconfig here, as we explained. Oh, it's closed right now. Well, go to my unconfig and change the resolution to 8K or 4K or 6K or whatever to make the final delivery. But yeah, it's the same workflow that we explained at the end of the masterclass. Is it possible to? Sorry, there is another question. Our next gen. Oh yeah, this is the headset support, which is probably the most common question for us for VR projects. This is something that we are currently studying, and it will be implemented for sure. I cannot give you a fixed date of that because we are currently now studying from the development perspective, but we will implement it sooner than later, or I think. But yeah, that's something that we cannot give you yet a fixed date for that. Is it possible to create a stereo footage from regular mono footage? Yes, as I explained here in this example, remember that we had this situation. Let me recover it. All right, so I'm going to disable the stereo mode. I'm going to do it again. In the VR view here, this is the Insta360 Pro camera. If we enable the stereo 3D mode, we have the anaglyph mode to check the stereoscopic, the stereo of my shot. And as you can see, well, this shot is stereoscopic, of course, but the title that we are integrating in my shot, which is an external element, is not stereoscopic, it's monoscopic. So the way to transform it in a monoscopic, in a stereoscopic shot is by using the stereo 3D node. So I can just click in here in the stereo 3D node, go to stereo, balance geometry, and in position X, I can just move it, and this will create the disparity between the two eyes to create or to move this object in 3D. There is a more advanced situation where is when we have depth maps. So for example, in this shot, let me recover it. There we go. So we had this shot, which is not a stereoscope. It's not an stereoscopic shot, but this shot, which is a CGI shot, it has a depth map, and the depth map can be extracted using the spatial key. Which is here, the spatial key. I'm going to duplicate this shot so we see it in a clear way. So I'm going to duplicate this. Sorry, there we go. Spatial key. And with the spatial key, I'm going to select the depth map of this shot. So I'm going to select depth map. There we go. And I'm going to go to the alpha because I'm now making a selection. So I go to the alpha and control the size of my depth map and the softness to create a nice depth map of my shot. All right. Okay, so I can use this depth map to create, to transform this shot from monoscopic to stereoscopic. And the way to do it is with the depth grade effect. This is pretty advanced, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. In the previous masterclass that we did in the morning, people were asking that they want to see this workflow in a more dedicated way, so we will study the possibility of doing a masterclass for that. But for now, let's say that we go to here, to the global mode. I'm going to enable the stereo mode. In here, as you can see, this is monoscopic. But in the moment that I just play with these parameters, there you go. Now I'm just creating the stereo of this shot. I can control the stereoscopic of this shot in a very efficient way thanks to the depth map. So basically I'm using the depth map of this shot to create an stereoscopic clip. All right. We will study the possibility of explain this full workflow in a dedicated masterclass because it's like as I said, it's pretty advanced. So yeah, we will introduce it in another masterclass. Okay. Is there a way to load the videos for the VR shots already grouped or stacked instead of having to stack them manually? No, because that functionality is not in Mistika VR. Or even if you say well, there is an option to do it, and maybe for the next masterclass I can explain it because I explain how the R&Ds work. Basically, in Mistika VR you have the option in the render to create to move where is this render? Yes. Oh, add to render queue. Sorry. If you click in add to render queue, what it does, what Mistika VR does, is to create an R&D file. An R&D file. Let's do it with this shot to understand what it does. An R&D file basically is a metadata file that you get when you render something in Mistika. You don't exactly need to render something. You can just run the script of rendering. So basically it's like faking the render but without transcoding at the end. And what it does is just creating right, yes. What it does is just creating the files that you get in Mistika when you render something, which are two. If we go to my home icon here and render, we have the test, which is the render that we did, and we have two files, the CLP and the R&D. The CLP is the link to the render. In this case, we haven't transcoded anything really, because so this CLP will be empty. But the R&D, if we load it, is a group, and inside this group, I have all the original media and all the metadata and all the effects and parameters that I've used before the render. So yeah, you can fake it the workflow by clicking in add to render queue. This will generate the R&Ds and then load those R&Ds in Mistika Boutique. But there is not like a proper option to do it automatically. You have to do it manually in the timeline. Okay, another question is, how looks working with a stereo VR files in Mistika Boutique? Do you have proxies? Okay, let me understand the question. How looks working with a stereo VR files in Mistika Boutique? Okay, the color grading. I think the first question here related is if the color grade works as well for stereo VR automatically without doing anything else. Of course, in Mistika, all the adjustment that you do, even if you are working in stereo 3D, will be adapted to a stereo. So for example, if we applied a color grade in here, let's do a quick color grade for this shot, the stereoscopic shot, which is this one, the Insta360 Pro. Okay, so I'm going to this one. I'm going to disable the stereo, but just to show you again that this is a stereoscopic shot, I can just load a color grade node and make some kind of adjustment. So I'm going just to it's calculating yet. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's make some kind of contrast and something like that. I don't know, something quick. Okay, so now this color adjustment is working in the left eye and in the right eye automatically, because in Mistika those adjustments are done automatically in the left eye and the right eye in the stereo 3D. It's asking as well, do you have proxies? Yes, you can create any kind of proxy in Mistika. You have in fact two options. You can use the playback cache, which basically will cache the selected clip in here to work faster, or you can go to the output and you can select the proxy option here and make a render to the internal Mistika format, which is JS, and it's much faster than any other format here for rendering and playing the result. So yeah, you can use two kind of proxies for Mistika, but even if you want to work, I don't know, to create proxies in ProRes, you can create them from here and work with the ProRes. Is it possible to save the preset of the stitching so you can use the same parameters for similar photos? Of course. In fact, in here there is a really cool functionality, which is basically that I can just let's duplicate this clip. Okay, so I'm going to fake this because I only have this Insta360 Pro clip, but I'm going to fake this situation. So let's say that you have like several Insta360 Pro clips on your timeline, and you have done the stitch of one of, oops, sorry. You have done the stitch of one of them. I'm going to first select, much faster if I go to here, and oops, I have the global active, so local, there you go. I do this to cut it faster in the whole stack. So I'm going to take all of them, macros, and split conform, and this way I will cut all the stitch per stack. Okay, so I have this situation where I have only one of the shots currently stitched. What I can do in here is just open my FX presets and just create a preset for this effect. I can call it Insta360 and press OK. So now I have my preset for this. If I go to here with Shift, I can just make double click, and automatically I'm loading the preset over my clip. But a faster way to do it, if I'm going to share the same parameters in here, is going to the VR stitch in here, select the propagate, and select the all objects. If I select the all objects and click perform propagate, all the VR stitch in my timeline will have the same parameters. Another way to do it is grouping the clips in gangs. So I have the gang option in here. I'm going to create a new gang. This is like a new group. I'm going to call it Insta360. Okay. And I'm going to put these shots in the same group. So with Control Shift, I just click on my storyboard, and now those shots are grouped in the same gang. So I can just select those parameters, select the current gang, perform propagate, and now if we move, sorry, let me see if what's failing here. Current gang, perform propagate. Okay. Oh no, it's not working for this effect for any reason. Okay, so we will take a look to that. But yeah, it should do the same thing at the end. It's perform propagate and propagate the result in this gang. For some reason it's not working in this example. We'll take a look at that. But it's another way to propagate the parameters in the whole timeline. And how many options use hotkeys, so you do not have to click with your mouse. Basically, hotkeys are open to you. If you open Mistika, let me open another instance of Mistika. So I will have two Mistikas running. In this case, when you open Mistika, you will have the user panel in here. If you go to Edit User Modes and go to the hotkeys, double click, you will have your menu to select any of the functionalities of Mistika can be associated with a hotkey. So at the end, you can just create your own mapping. For now, basically, you have the general controls or the most commonly used controls. But if you need one specific functionality in one specific hotkey, you can just assign the functionality from here. Okay, more questions. Can you cover object removal, such as tripod or shadow, for a stereo clip? Yes, it works in the same way. So again, I'm going to go back to my stereo 3D shot, which is this one. I'm going to move in here. Let me select the area where I don't have the guy just mounting the camera. So you see, it's now calculating all the thumbnails with everything on the fly. That's the reason why it's taking a bit longer to load. Okay, now it's faster. Okay, don't have the, okay, this part is too close to the, okay, so I'm going to move to this shot. Much better. Okay, let me take a look. I'm going to select a shot where the guy is not close to the camera. There you go. So I'm going to select this shot as an example. Okay, so I'm going just to remove this, and I'm going to open my node graph as I did before. I don't have anything here. Okay, so node graph reload. Okay, I have some effects over here, so I'm going to move this shot here to an empty area, so we don't have anything here loaded. Node graph. Okay, I have this well. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we're going to use this as a background. with the stereoscopic. Oh, I still have the other shot. Okay. Okay, that one. Okay, so as we did in another example, we are going to load the VR view effect first. And with the VR view effect apply, I'm just going to rotate my camera in planar mode to select the tripod. Okay, so let's select this area here. Now we are going to insert the vector paint, open the paint interface. And as I did in the other example, I'm going just to take one reference and paint over to clean the tripod. This situation is a bit more complex, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Just as an example, I'm going to paint a little bit over just to remove it in a fast way. Okay, let's say that this is enough. Now, if I want to bring back this patch into my original shot, what I do is what I did before, just duplicate the link, load the VR view, and connect the vector paint, because again the VR view is the compositor for VR. And in here we just need to click in reverse of the previous camera. So refresh the screen by double clicking it. And now the tripod is gone. If we enable the stereo mode with the black and white anaglyph, we see that the stereoscopic is being applied as well in the vector paint. So the answer is yes, you can just you can work like in a normal way, and your adjustment will be adapted in Stereo 3D. In Stereo 3D, what if you need to balance match L and R cameras separately for custom rings, where color matched lens were not available? Can you grade each side separately? Yes, as well. In fact, for those situations where you have like L and R cameras independently, you can use the Stereo 3D functionality in here. The Stereo 3D function here. If not, you can use the switch eye or stereo extract to extract the stereo of a clip. So for example, in here, I can just switch eye. Let me open it. I'm going to disable the VR mode. And here I can say the left only or the right only. So in this way, I'm just extracting one eye and the other one. So let's say that the first one is the left, and I'm going just to duplicate this, and the other one is going to be the right one. So now we have left and right. If now I put the Stereo 3D node on top of them, I can just control the general stereo parameters, even match colors between the two eyes and match the geometry, which is very powerful tools. And I can control the color by separate by going to color grade and going to color grade. So I can use two color grades per eye and then use the Stereo 3D to match them between them. So yeah, the workflow for a stereo is extremely powerful in Mistika. It's the standard in the industry for a stereoscopic production. So I don't think you will find any situation where Mistika is a limit for your stereo workflows. Do you have any kind of planar tracking for the graphics or stabilization? Not planar tracking, stabilization we have it in the VR view and the VR stitch effect. So if we go to here in the VR stitch, you have the stabilize option to stabilize the shot. If you want to stabilize an object or use the tracking, you can do it as well. If you go to the tracking, Mistika now here understands that you are using a VR shot, so it creates 2 points, because for stabilizing a shot in VR you need 2 points, and you can just follow any object and apply the track. Not in here in the VR stitch, you need to apply it in the VR view. Remember that this is the tool for compositing objects in VR. So basically you have the option to stabilize the yaw, pitch, roll to stabilize the shot following the movement of the clip.